Want to bet?
Yep.
Then get into the action at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered. Bet pregame, in-game, or on one of the many unique prop bets. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Thank you. Or in Ontario, download the app now using our QR code at the bottom of the screen. 19 plus, please play responsibly.
This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Welcome to another episode of Agent Provocateur. We've got a great show today, Adam.
We sure do, Allan. Bit of a, for me at least, intimidating guest, but somebody who I watched from the moment I was a little boy onwards.
So we have on today Steve Yzerman, and let's do a little introduction and get right into it.
Okay.
Steve Yzerman was drafted 4th overall in the 1983 NHL draft. He became captain of the Detroit Red Wings at 21 years of age. He's 7th all-time in points in NHL history. He's a 4-time Stanley Cup winner, 3 times as a player, and 1 time as an executive. He was the winner of the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. Inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2009 after a 22-year career in the NHL. He played in the 1998 and 2002 Olympics, representing Canada, winning a gold medal in 2002. Later on in his life, he was GM of Team Canada in the Olympics in 2010 and 2014, winning gold both times. After retiring in 2006 from the NHL, he became the executive vice president and alternate governor of Detroit, moving on to Tampa in 2010, taking on a Tampa Bay team near the bottom of the standings and building them up to where they became a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. In 2015, he was named NHL GM of the Year, and somewhat as a surprise in 2018, stepped down from Tampa as GM just as they were about to go on a 2-year Stanley Cup run and another year to the finals, returning to Detroit, where he was named general manager in 2019, to where he remains in that position today. Let's give a big welcome to the Agent Provocateur podcast to Steve Yzerman. So here we are today with Steve Yzerman, another episode of Agent Provocateur. As everyone knows, Steve is the general manager and executive vice president of the Detroit Red Wings. And Steve, an area that I'd really like to focus on and talk to you about is the process of a elite player like you coming towards the end of a superlative 22-year career in the NHL and looking at life after hockey as a player. And obviously you've had a amazing career also in management with Team Canada, 2 gold medals, Olympic gold medals, and with your time in Detroit, then Tampa, and back to Detroit. So can you tell us a little bit about when, as a player, you started thinking about becoming a general manager?
I think I retired at the age of 40. Probably around the age of 30, started thinking about what I would want to do post playing. I always had an interest in not only hockey but all sports. I've followed every sport. Always intrigued by trades and drafts and whatnot, following the business of sports. And as I got older, started to think about what do I want to do. Ultimately, I knew I'd stay in hockey because sadly I don't really have much else to fall back on. And my interests were really in hockey. You know, I like the sport, being involved in the sport, been around it my whole life. So then it became, as I got older, do I want to get into coaching? Do I want to get into management? I used to spend a lot of time, even going back to when I was drafted, with Jim Devellano, who was the GM who drafted me in Detroit back in '83. and we used to talk a lot about hockey and about what was going on in the league. He'd share with me a lot of his thoughts and happenings. And then when Kenny Holland, and Allan, I'm sure you dealt with Kenny over the years, he was a great mentor and a great resource. And he was our GM, took over as the GM in '97 in Detroit. And he and I used to talk about everything going on, not only our team, but around the league, about hockey players. I'd pick his brain on things. And as I got closer to the end of my career, I felt like, you know what, I'm going to stay in the game. Plan is I want to stay with the Red Wings. They had suggested you finish your career, you come and join us in management, and what role, what capacity, we'll figure that out at the time. So, I knew pretty much towards the end of my career I was going to get involved. I had decided, I would prefer to be in management as opposed to coaching. I really say if I'm going to coach, I got to go somewhere and start coaching, whether that's in midget hockey, junior hockey. That's a tough position to be in as a coach, and I would want some experience. And I didn't, I wanted to stay in the Detroit area and be local with my family, and I thought management was more intriguing. Which role in management, I really wasn't sure at that time.
So I heard that from some of the people in Detroit back then in management, that as a player, you would sit with some of the people like Kenny, like Jimmy Nill, and ask questions like, how do you put a scouting staff together? What are you looking for in scouts? And I find that fascinating that a player, in your position would be looking into those areas of management. What kind of lessons were you learning back then by just picking their brain about the decisions they were making in real time?
I found it, as a player, you have good insight into the players in the league. The teams you're playing against, these guys. You have a really good idea of what's going on in the NHL, but our scouts would pop into town when we had meetings, or when you got on playoff runs, they would come in. I didn't really know how things were done. And again, as I got in closer to the end of my career, you wonder about things. A trade would be made, and I got a chance to sit down with Kenny, Jim Nill at the time, even Ryan Martin, who took over when the salary cap came in. He came in, and we used to sit a lot at lunch. We'd share in the same room, and you got a chance sometimes simply to sit with them and pick their brain on it. But again, I just found it fascinating. A trade was made. All these things were coming up on our trade deadline, how things were done, why they were done. I'd have my perspective and my opinion on this, what I thought of it, and pick their brains and get mostly I like hockey, Allan, honestly. And it was just talk about the game. We could sit there for hours and talk about the game. And as I got closer to my end of my career, and then when I really got into retired, in my first 4 years in retirement was really about education. I found it really interesting to sit in on July 1, a free agency, to talk to Kenny about his planning in the off season, to, how even Jimmy Nill, how he was putting together his draft lists at his scouting meetings. These were all things I was never a party to,
right.
And really didn't know how they got done. And it was eye-opening to see why things were done. And it isn't as simple as we all thought it was as players to get things done.
From my perspective on this side, representing players, the one thing that I've always been really surprised about in talking with general managers around the league is they know their own team better than anybody, bar none. But many times I talk with GMs, and you come to realize they don't really know the rest of the league that well, because games are going on, and it's hard to watch games when you're playing every other night or back to back. There aren't a lot of nights where you can sit there and watch games, and a lot of your information as a GM is probably coming to you from Pro Scout reports or the time that you can spend, catching up on certain players. But it's amazing how GMs have mastered their own teams down to players who they've drafted and are up to date on everything. And many times I have been talking to other GMs and have heard back, where is he at now, that guy?
Mhm.
What team's he on? And in all my discussions with you over the many, many years that we've worked together, your knowledge of players around the league is second to none. So that is something that you must really take pride in and work on, is keeping up to date in what's going on around the league as well.
I try to. You are really correct, Allan, in that saying we like to think we know our own team really well. I can tell you, every time we sit down at a game, at one of our games, I sit there and before the game we say, okay, let's talk about the other team. Who are their pending UFAs? Let's keep an eye on them. And the game goes by, and at the end of the game, we say, what'd you think of this guy or that guy? And I'm like, geez, I didn't really pay attention to him, because you're so focused on your own team. You're watching really watching the play. It's hard to get away from watching your team. What I really like to do, and it's the best part of the job, is watching games. I think for all of us, we're in it because we ultimately love watching hockey. And so what I really like to do is go to games, whether it's NHL games, junior games, or minor league team play, and simply watch. And if you're not watching your own team, that's the best way to get to know the other players on the team. Because as well as I think I know the league, until you trade for this player or you sign this player and he's out there, there's always some part of his game, good or bad, that you say, geez, I didn't realize he was this or that. He's much faster than I thought. He's much more physical, or he can't quite do this. So, there's always something going on during the hockey season. There's a game every night of the week. And I try to, see obviously as many Detroit games as we can, try to get to Grand Rapids as much as I can. And then you're kind of weighing, do I want to go see maybe with our amateur scouts to see a junior game or whatnot. But we really focus on our own team. And, every night, I'm getting older now. I used to be able to watch our game and go home and watch the late game. I don't watch many of those late games anymore. So it's really important to surround yourself with a really good pro scouting staff, a really good amateur staff, and then really learn to trust their judgment and get their advice or their guidance on who's a good fit for us. And then ultimately jointly decide, okay, not only are they a good fit for us, what do we have to do to acquire them in trade or as a free agent, what's the contract? Does the contract make sense as well for that type of player? So it's really important that you have a good staff around you and then really, really rely on them, because you can't do everything's happening so fast throughout the course of the season, and you can't be in two places at once. And we're at once. But the good thing is there's so much access to video now. You can watch games at all different leagues, but it's still not the same as actually being there in person. So to your point, you really need to rely on a good staff to make your decisions.
I heard the car rides between Detroit and Grand Rapids with you and Kenny and Jim and Ryan a little bit later on were quite the experience. That
honestly,
literally both ways back and forth.
Loved them. That's where I really got to talk about things. One, we'd have Sirius on the radio. We got to listen to Espo and on Sirius XM and what was going on around the league. But yeah, I just literally, Ryan, myself, Kenny, Jimmy Nill, or varying groups of us would back and forth 2 hours and 15 minutes to GR. For me, it was a great chance to sit in the back and just ask a lot of questions, pick their brain, watch them go into the locker room in GR after the game to talk to the players, the coaches, and then coming home after to how they evaluated the game and whatnot, and their decision making. So it was a lot of fun. Those guys as well. Great sense of humor, really down to earth people. But for me, as an up and comer, really inclusive in that they I was welcome in everything. Was able to ask questions, and also they get my opinion on it from somebody from completely inexperienced, from coming in totally from a different position. And again, it was really eye-opening for me on the management side of things. And again, I really enjoyed it and found it intriguing. And that's why I kind of continued on and got that bug to like, hey, I really want to run my own team or manage my own team and kind of make some of these decisions and do some things. And I say it's probably not. It was a lot easier sitting in the back seat running the team than it is sitting in the front seat running the team.
Adam?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Steve, just that, because I imagine you're sitting in there with, a management group that's got multiple Stanley Cups and you were a part of them on the ice. And so that first meeting you step into, do you say anything at all? I feel like first day at work would still be intimidating because it's such a different facet of the game.
Absolutely. I think right when I first retired, one of the meetings that I sat in was with our amateur scouting staff, Jimmy Nill running it, and it was the John Tavares draft. And we weren't picking up high and all that, but I remember them debating in the draft in their order, and they started right at the top. Okay, who's number one? Who's number two? Hedman, I think it was Matt Duchene, Hedman, and Johnny JT were the top three guys at that time, and they went around the table asking everybody, "What's your opinion?" and who's one? And it got to me, and it was like, "Who's one?" And I was like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, God, I don't have an answer here. And that was my first experience in that. Being put on the spot here, I got to say something. I got to make a decision. So again, it was you learn a lot. You learn how to make decisions. That you have to make decisions, and that was one of the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh boy, like if I had the first pick here, which one of these guys am I going to take? Like, one, you don't want to be wrong. Ultimately, you decide, you know what? I don't know which one's going to be better. And I learned just make sure you get a good player. And you can't predict who's going to be in 5 years, who's going to be a more valuable player. Just make sure you get a really good player.
Was your answer Victor Hedman, though?
You know what I said? I think this was a cop-out, but I was real smart. I'm like, we're going to trade the pick. And that's what I said. And I think Jim Nill, he looked at me. Joe McDonnell was there, who's with him in Dallas now. I know what they were thinking. They're like, yeah, whatever, Steve. I'm like, hey, I'm not sure. Let's trade the pick and get multiple picks. And that's that was my answer at the time. So, and I'm like, was I waffling or didn't want to? But I'm like, yeah, easier said than done. You got to go up there and make a pick and announce first overall, and you're trading that pick. One, you got to have a partner, and two, boy, oh boy, that's a risky move. So again, it's easy to say looking back now, you'd be thrilled with either one, but at the time, I think that was my answer. Easy to say.
Love it.
Can you walk us through a typical day as a GM?
Yeah, every day is different. I'd like to tell you, I say, hey, I'm in the office at 9 and I leave at 5 or whatnot. It depends, there's a lot of travel. One thing you always have to be available. Same thing for you, Allan, is that day you put your phone away for the day and say, hey, I'm going to do something, whatever it is. That's the day everything hits the fan, right? And it's like, so you just have to be accessible. I wouldn't say it's not a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job. You don't have, your summers off. There's times when you're incredibly busy throughout the season, and then there's times when you're really kind of doing nothing other than watching hockey games, and you just have to be accessible when a player gets injured, whatnot. So for me, we're in Washington D.C. today. I came in yesterday. The team was out in Seattle. I watched the game. I got up early, flew home for the day in Detroit, flew back in yesterday morning. Today, sitting on the road, you get up in the morning, you check your emails. There wasn't any late night scores last night. Get up, try to get a little bit of a workout in, trying to stay reasonably healthy. And then, I didn't bother going to morning skate today. I've been on the phone talking to, we got the trade deadline coming up, kind of check in around the league, have a couple of calls with some of our players' agents on different topics. And then, I don't do a whole lot of media things and whatnot. Our coach really represents the team on a day-to-day basis, and then head over to the rink and watch our game tonight. We'll fly home we'll get in at probably 2:00. I'll get up. Our team has a scheduled day off tomorrow. I'll head down to the office. I got some other just internal within our hockey operations things that I need to address, and then again be on the phone. You're just at this time of year, you're kind of going back and forth with other teams, just on staying in the loop on the trade deadline as to what's going on that relates to your own team, and then go home and watch a game tomorrow night.
How do you prepare for the trade deadline beyond just talking to GMs and talking to agents? Can you talk about how you get yourself prepared for that day? Or actually, it's several weeks.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're basically into the deadline right now.
Sure. Yeah. For me, the trade deadline starts in January, when we all kind of within a 1 month or maybe, a month period, sometime in early January to the end of January, everybody would do their mid-season scouting meetings. And depending on where your team is at, you're going to kind of create a plan out of that for the trade deadline for the second half of the season. And, you talk about potentially other teams, they're pending free agents, or you look at that time kind of potential trade options, but assess our team in mid to late January, and then start to make a plan for the trade deadline. Now, here we sit today with the Red Wings with a lot of games, us, Buffalo, even Ottawa, I think, we're not too far out of it, but we do have games in hand on some of the teams that we're relatively close on.
Yep.
So I think I can't speak for those teams, but for else, it kind of, like a month ago, we weren't this close. There was more teams to jump over, and you think, okay, like, let's plan for the deadline. And we just re-signed Ollie Mata, who was a pending free agent. Some of our free agents, we say, we'll try to get signed before the deadline. Some guys we still have interest in signing, and it may be after the deadline. I'm not sure. But kind of, prepare, see where your team is at and have a plan. And we try to do that. And then you spend that last few weeks, really, if you're, say, a buyer or a seller, the buyers are out scouting the players they want to add. And then if you're a selling team, you're looking at the teams, whether it's draft picks, you're not necessarily scouting draft picks, but you're out looking at other teams' prospects, or you got your staff out there looking at other teams' prospects. So really depends on where you are. And for us today, we sit here, we're kind of right in the middle, and we're going to have to make some decisions, in the next 8 or 9 days. Ultimately, we're still trying to build. We're still trying to get better. It wouldn't expect us to go out and be trading like our best assets for rental players or anything like that. We wouldn't be opposed to making a trade, but it would be players we want to know that are a part of our future. And doing that would require, ultimately giving up your young assets. And we, not opposed to doing that, but it's got to be somebody who's going to be here with us. So you kind of come up with a plan in January, and depending on how your team's doing, you kind of adjust the plan. That's the way I do it anyway.
So Brian Burke once famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, what's the point of getting into the playoffs if you're going to be in 8th place and get swept out in 4 games in the first round? And the year he said it, LA was in 8th place in the West, and it ended up winning the cup.
You're right.
What are your thoughts on that? Is it just to get in, if you can get in, and then anything can happen? Or are you thinking also about, how much value is it to get in but be in 8th place?
Yeah, well, I think we are running a business, and so to grow, I think there's great value in making the playoffs. One, after the trade deadline, those games that you're playing at home on a short-term business plan, there's great value in after the deadline, those games being meaningful. You're playing these games that are must-win games. You're going to get better TV ratings. You're going to get better walk-ups at your gate. So it is important for your revenues as a business. Having said that, I think to me, you have to really analyze your team. And you mentioned those LA teams. Surprisingly, they were, maybe bubble teams to get in. I think twice they might have done it from the 8th seed, got there and won the cup. Dean Lombardi was a GM of that. I couldn't tell you. Maybe you've had him on the show, but I think our team is good. I think our team has a chance. I don't know what they did at the deadline, but they had some really good players that went on to win the cup. For me, you kind of analyze your team. You see where you're at. Do we have a chance to make it? what's the cost of improving our team to give us a better chance? I do believe there's great value in making the playoffs. One, from a business perspective, short term, but for long term, is for your players, particularly your younger guys, to get the experience, the more experience down the stretch, having these must-win games, even to get into playoffs, even if it's for the first time. That's a great experience. And then ultimately, anything can happen. Again, I went down my first year as a GM in Tampa, Allan, is to 10-11. And, my whole plan at the start, I'm not trading any draft picks or anything like that. We're going to keep our guys. We got to the deadline and we were in a playoff spot, and we talked about it. Guy Boucher was our coach and talked about it, what our needs were. We're kind of close. Maybe we can improve our team a little bit. We ended up giving up a third-round pick to St. Louis for Eric Brewer, and Eric came in and played for us. We made the playoffs. Lo and behold, we played the Penguins in the first round. Sid's hurt, Malkin's hurt, and we kind of came back in the series, won it in 7. And then we beat Washington in the second round. Next thing you know, we're in the third round. And my plan initially at the time was, we're going to try and keep adding draft picks. It looks like I think Tampa, my first year, picked 6th or 7th. I said, we'll probably have another top 10 pick this year. Next thing you know, we lose in Game 7 of the semifinals. We're picking 27th in the first round. It was great for our organization. We one, for the guys like Stammer and Hedman to get those experience, those young guys. 2, the fan base was rejuvenated a little bit. Slowly we're able to increase our fan base, our season ticket base for the next season. Ultimately, we didn't make the playoffs the next year, but there was a lot of value in making that playoff. For me, we got a chance to make it here. It's going to be tough. There's good teams in the similar spot to us. Ultimately, we're still trying to build for the future. To be giving up high picks and things like that, I wouldn't want to. But if our team made the playoffs, nobody would say that was a bad thing for us, really, And regardless of what happened once you got in, it wouldn't be a bad thing.
So when you were playing and when you first came into management in Detroit after retiring, really analytics didn't exist. And now analytics is a huge part of every team and the way teams are run. Every team has a robust analytics department with several employees. And I'm not asking in any way for you to give away any trade secrets or, violate national security regulations or anything like that at all. But what's your general philosophy and overview on analytics right now?
I truly think, I'm reading a book right now called The MVP Machine. You might have read it. It's based on analytics in baseball and, the way they play, the way their teams were constructed. And it's really, really interesting. I think, hockey, and, when I first got to Tampa, again, they had a small analytics department, and really interesting guys. And that was all new to me. And I kind of picked their brain on it. And it was just really at the infant stages of
Yep.
it. I think there's been a lot has changed in the last 10 to 12 years. I still think hockey is in the infant stages of analytics. I think we're all still trying to figure out what's really important, what has value, what doesn't have value in it. And that it takes time to look back. There's some statistics that have names that have been created based on shots on goal and things like that. They were all the rage a few years ago, maybe not as much for teams now. So I think we're all trying to figure out how to use it. But the simple basics of, I think in the business world, they've been looking at things data-wise, analytics-wise forever, whether it be contracts, player production, and things. Or in hockey now, in sports started to take all that data and just look at it subjectively, without even or like factually, as opposed to just watching the game and predicting this player is going to score this or that, and or he's worth this or that. You look at a lot of the data on everything, and it's being applied to hockey now. But I really do think, based on what I've seen in baseball and what they're doing in some of the other sports, we're still trying to figure out what's got value. That's really what I think. But I do think it's important to, we look with our eyes and our experience and all that. you look at it from an analytic perspective, it forces you to reevaluate. What does the data tell us? Is it supporting what we're saying? Is it contradicting what we're seeing? And if so, why? But hockey is, the NHL is getting in. We got the puck tracking and player tracking on the ice. Maybe some teams are way ahead. We're still trying to figure out what it's telling us, and what we do with it.
Now, one thing that's really unique with you, maybe even now some more than any other team, is with many teams in contract negotiations, the assistant GM has risen to the point where he's doing most of the negotiating with agents. And I know from personal experience with you that you like to handle the negotiations yourself with your NHL players. Why is that?
Well, I would say Sean Horkoff, who's our assistant GM, with the help of Aaron Kahn and Brian Campbell, they'll do our entry level contracts and handle the minor league contracts. The majority of the deals, vast majority of the deals with the Detroit Red Wings, with our group of players, I try to do them. Really, honestly, I learned it from Kenny Holland. Because I asked him that same question. Some teams have a designated person who negotiates their contracts. Kenny always said to me, I want the agent and the player to know that the message is coming directly from me. This is how I feel. This is, that was his philosophy, and I tended to agree with that. I just felt like, good or bad, I want the player to know that I'm the one who's making the decision here. I'm the one who's offering my opinion from the other side. This is where you fit. This is what I feel you're worth. These are the reasons why you feel you're worth. So I learned that from Kenny, and I've stuck with it. While I was in Tampa, depending on where we were at, how busy we were, Julian Brisebois, who you know extremely well, he had a tremendous experience in contracts. I defer to him sometimes to let him handle some of them when we had a lot going on, so to speak, or maybe we're just real busy. You know how it is on July 1, things are happening quick, and we kind of piecemeal it together and get things done. But again, I learned it all from Kenny, and I felt like that was a good approach, and I tried to stick with that in the majority of our deals. I still try to do, but it's with the support and the opinion and the fact checking and research with my staff as well, with Brian, Sean, and Aaron.
Okay, Adam.
Well, Steve, I've got a couple questions, and I think the first one is you talked about the nerves that come with running your own team, right? You were excited to run your own team. You thought as a player, this has got to be a lot easier than it turned out to be. Do you remember your first trade? And I'm not talking about where you traded a draft pick. I mean, you mentioned the Eric Brewer trade, but where you're trading a person that you know is a valuable asset and you're taking a risk on an asset coming in. Do you remember that pressure? And do you remember that phone call?
Well, let me think here for a sec. I would start off by saying, the hardest part of the job initially was, now you're in a position to you're the one who's making decisions. As a hockey player on the team for my whole career, all your decisions were made on the ice like that, like instincts. You're playing the game, you practice and all that. You were prepared. The puck was dropped, you go. You made your decisions on the fly. But ultimately, we didn't make decisions. You were told what time practice was. You were told what day to report for training camp. What the schedule was there. What time the bus was. What time the plane was. And you just follow like a herd of cattle. And you showed up, and the coaches told you who you were playing with, and they tap you on the shoulder when you're going on the ice, and away you go. And now I'm retired, and now I'm I'm the GM, and it's like, okay, guys, what are we doing? And everybody's looking at me as like, guess what? You're the one who's deciding what we're doing. Geez, I've never been in this position before. It was a real eye opener. And I think for a lot of guys, the real challenge is making decisions, because we really haven't had to do it other than once the puck is dropped and they ask you why you did that, why you do that, what were you thinking on that play? And you go, I don't know, I just reacted, Well, now as a GM, you're in that spot. And I think it didn't really turn out, but going way back was Brian Burke was awesome. When I first, I think he was in Toronto at the time. I was the GM in Tampa, and we were talking about there was kind of a deadline on a particular player with a no trade language or something like that. And talking with him, that was really my first negotiation on a trade, which didn't pan out. But one, I'm dealing with Brian Burke, and for me, that was quite intimidating as a rookie. First year as a general manager, I didn't know Brian really well. I knew him from a little bit when he was working at the league, and me as a player when he was handling. I think he was executive VP of hockey ops for the league, and that was a real challenge in talking with him with it. And actually, like it was intimidating, but he was really good. And he's like, "Hey, Steve, I know this is the first kind of time you've talked about this type of a deal, a significant deal, and I get it. It kind of eased my nerves a little bit because I'm like, shit, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Like, I don't know if I should do this, shouldn't do this. What is good? I don't know. I'm trying to not trying to give the other GM the runaround, but that was my first time. I don't want to get into the specifics of the players and whatnot we were talking about, but that was the first time, and that was even before the season started, if I recall, and it was quite nerve wracking. And ultimately, but he said, "Hey, I get it, Steve. I've been in this spot a long time ago, so it eased my nerves a little bit." And I never really early on, I never made any major deals. I don't think that involved really big name players or anything like that. As things went along, I think my first, when I traded like first round picks might have been with a deal with Philadelphia, Braden Coburn, and we gave up Radko Gudas and a first round pick. That was my first one, and trading first round picks for me was kind of like a no. I'm not doing that. I won't ever do that. And that was the first time I kind of I think we might have had 2 picks that year. That made it a little bit easier. But I always had in my head, I'm never going to give up those high picks ever. And ultimately we did. I think Braden had 2 years on his deal. It's kind of how I justified it to myself, is I got him for more than one playoff run.
Okay. Wow. I just can't imagine the pressure. And I think the other question I had is, you mentioned working out before every day if you can. And you know that Allan's seen about 500 Bruce Springsteen concerts. So I'm assuming that when Allan works out, his playlist is exclusively Bruce. But I was curious about what Steve Yzerman's Spotify personal playlist might be when you're working out in the morning.
Well, it would, ironically, I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. My first Bruce Springsteen concert was, I think, in 1979 at the Ottawa Civic Center, right when the River album first came out.
Yep.
I went with my buddies, Darren Pang and I, and were playing Tier 2 in Nepean, and saw Bruce at the Ottawa Civic Center. I've probably seen him a half dozen times, not as many as Allan, but generally, I don't have a Spotify account. I'm not technically savvy enough to do it. So if I use it, I borrow one of my kids' accounts. And as you can imagine, they listen to a lot different music than I do. So, but in general, I'll put on, if I am listening to anything, I'll put on I would listen to U2.
Okay.
Anything, pretty much all U2, a shuffle of all their albums.
Love that.
Are you going to Bruce March 29th in Detroit?
Possibly. I mentioned it to my wife. I got to check our schedule to see where we are. I think we're at home. You know what? I wouldn't mind seeing him. I saw him in 1984, in the summer of '84, at Joe Louis Arena. Yeah. I believe I saw him at the Palace. Saw him at the Silverdome, which is no longer there. Saw him at the Fox Theater when he the Ghost of Tom Joad tour, I think it was, when he was just playing an acoustic set. Saw him there. So at LCA would kind of be another opportunity. You know, it's ironic. I used to. His daughter's a world-class show jumper on horses, and
Olympia.
Actually, it was in DC here. There's this big show. My daughter was in ponies at the time, maybe 10 years ago, or actually 15 years ago, I think. And she had qualified for this show. It's a national show, and they did it at at it was the MCI Verizon Center. I don't even know what it's called now, Capital One Center, but in the arena, and it was in I think in November. They literally have the horse show on the ice surface. Take the ice out, do the horse show. Well, lo and behold, like Bruce is there watching his daughter. He's leaning over the rail, and I'm right there, and I'm like, I got to go talk to him because he used to go to the Ranger games a lot. I don't know if he still does, but I'm like, I just couldn't work up the nerve to go talk to him and whatnot. But it was pretty cool. He's just sitting there minding his own business, watching his daughter ride her horse. It's pretty amazing. But I've kind of grew up with him, so I might have to check that show out if I can.
Yeah, especially since it's in your building.
Yeah.
Right. And it is a fantastic building. I saw Kid Rock there when they first opened it, and it was a tremendous show. It is a good building for concerts. Acoustics are great. The vibe in the arena is really good. So it's been a while since I've seen him, at least live, so might have to put it on the schedule.
You got any hookups for tickets at the building, or?
I hope I can get in, right? Should be. I may not get great seats, but I'll get in the building.
Awesome.
So let me ask you. Let's go back to hockey. Although I love talking about Bruce, as everyone knows. What motivated you to leave Detroit and go to Tampa when you did? And I think at the time, if I remember, there were a couple of other opportunities with other teams as well. What made you choose Tampa over anywhere else?
A little bit of it was timing. I had worked with the Olympic team. I had worked with Hockey Canada, the 07 World Champions through the 2010 Olympics. And after the Olympics, I wasn't really sure what my plan was going to be. I debated, do I want to be, do I want to be a GM? It was pretty clear in my eyes, like, if I want to be a GM, I'm probably going to have to leave Detroit. Kenny, the team was rolling. They won the cup in was it 08? They won the cup. Jimmy Nill was, in my eyes, and deservedly so. If Kenny moved up or retired, Jimmy Nill would step into the role as GM. And I felt like whatever I was, as 40-something years old at the time, if I want to do it, I'm going to have to start to move on. So after the Olympics in 2010, I thought seriously about it. And then ultimately I was interviewed, met and was interviewed by Jeff Finnick. And the more I talked with him, the more engaged I got, or the more interested I got. I was intrigued. He was very down to earth. And I enjoyed speaking with him and his vision for the team. And then ultimately I looked at it and say, okay, it's a pretty good job. Like, I understand the owner's vision, and you had Stamkos and Hedman as the, first and second overall picks. I'm like, hey, that's a good opportunity there to build off of those two guys. So a lot of it was timing for me at that time. And I wasn't really sure. It's like, maybe I wait, maybe I go, and then say, you know what, like, I don't know if these opportunities are going to come along or where they're going to come from. So it started to make sense for me. And then ultimately was offered the job and accepted it. But, again, a lot of these things are timing wise. And, it was a wonderful experience. Jeff Vinnick is fantastic for our league, has been, as you know, fantastic for the Lightning organization and the community. What he's done down there is incredible. And then, Tampa's a really neat little market down there. I say little, like I kind of consider it somewhat of a small city. It's got, tremendous population around it, but you've had players that have played there and proved to be a great spot, very different than a Vegas or a Miami or whatnot, but a great community that I really enjoyed being down there and being a part of it.
I think so many people who live in that part of Florida come from the East Coast or come from the Midwest and have moved down. So they have the hockey pedigree. Maybe they played hockey. They certainly were fans of hockey, and they come down to Tampa. The team is young, exciting, building, getting better, having some success right away. And then, of course, the two runs. I don't think that hockey was as foreign as it may have been to some of the other markets.
Yeah, I would agree. There is a lot of Midwestern people in on that coast. I think they basically, you can drive right down 75 from Detroit right through Tampa. And there's a lot of Midwesterners there. The other thing that's helped really grow the game down there is a lot of retired players down, whether it's in Tampa, Fort Myers, down the Miami area. They've had young kids playing hockey. They've got involved in developing the programs, and they're running very successful programs. So the game is growing down there. They've built more arenas, more kids are playing, and you're seeing kids, as you know, drafted out of not only Florida but some of the other markets as well, like non-traditional markets in the U.S. But yeah, no, it's worked out really well down there. You got a lot more kids playing and good hockey players, and but yeah, it's amazing. Like I go down there and work down there. Like nobody knew or could care less who I was. And I worked for the Lightning. The only time I ever got recognized was when somebody was from Michigan and say, "Hey, I'm from Michigan. Aren't you Yzerman?" And I'm like, yeah, that's me.
Did you like that? The fact that you could live in a lot more anonymity than you probably could walking the streets of Michigan?
Actually, I got pretty good anonymity in Michigan as well. But you know what? Honestly, like, as to be the general manager of a team, like the big markets are unreal. It's great, but there's a lot more scrutiny on every decision you make. So in some of them, and it probably is the same for the players as well. Is there's less scrutiny. It's probably easier to do your job a little bit in some of the non-traditional, it's not of the big, huge hockey markets that have, the original 6 markets and things. I think it's a little, there's not as much media involved, and that's good and bad, but just there's not as much scrutiny. It allows you to kind of do your job, be a little bit more patient maybe in things, and not feel the pressure as much in those types of markets.
Yeah, Adam?
Steve, I want to ask you about Allan. When Allan Walsh comes up on your caller ID, are you nervous? Are you anxious? Is it going to be a good time? Like, what are your conversations usually like, and what's it like to negotiate with Allan?
You know what? Like we talk pretty regularly, I would say, Allan. I don't know how much you talk to other GMs and all that, but I think over the course of, I started in 2010. I remember the first player we talked about was Sean Bergenheim. Remember, Allan? At the time, that was back in 2000 and was that 2000 and summer of 2010, I guess.
Yeah.
And then over time, we've had a lot of different. We haven't done necessarily a ton of contracts, but we've had tons of discussion. Allan represented Jonathan Drouin, who was a high draft pick of ours, and we, going from the time of the draft throughout his time in Tampa, we had a lot of good discussions, and I'd like to think that we've gotten to know each other really well. I think Allan feels very, very comfortable in good or bad expressing his thoughts on a situation. I say, I've come to understand not only Allan, but where all the agents are coming from, and that's a good thing. And that ultimately, the really good agents really care about their players, and they're gonna come to me on the best behalf of their player. And sometimes it's not always positive. It can't be. Unfortunately, it isn't always positive. And so I think Allan feels comfortable in being real honest with me, good or bad. He works hard for his players, and I've come to appreciate that. And so every time he calls, I sometimes it might be just social on things we talk about, what's going on. Not only maybe it's in hockey, maybe it's completely different. And so I enjoy our conversations, and I hope he feels the same. But I think over time you develop a good relationship. When I first started in the business, it was always, to me, and I think it's coming from a former player's background, everything's a competition. Every trade you're trying to negotiate, you're trying to win. Every contract you're trying to win, and it's like over time I've learned, that's not the way you operate. One, you're never going to get anything done. And two, you have to take, look at the other side's perspective. What are they trying to accomplish? What's important to them? And see if you can come to a common ground. So we've had a lot of good experiences. And truthfully, I say that I've learned a lot from guys like Allan, because I can pick their brain. I can ask them questions. I can get their viewpoint on things. And I do learn a lot. And it's amazing. Like I was so smart when I retired, and I was this, smartest guy in hockey. And then I'm a GM, and I realized I have no clue what I'm doing, really, honestly. And to this day, I'm not so sure I even know what I'm doing. So I like to talk to the people in the business and hear their perspectives and thoughts on things. Even, we talk a lot about our CBA and our league and the pros and the cons, what's good and bad. And you think, and it's like, hey, you know what, Allan or this person, they brought up a really good point, and they see it different than me. And that's very interesting. So I'm learning to appreciate not only the agents in the business, but all the other people in the business, because they see things different from me, and I'm trying to learn.
Allan, same question.
Yeah, I would say that in working with Steve over the years, you can't always agree. And when you disagree, and both sides are expressing their sincere positions on an issue. The one thing you can always count on from Steve is that he's always going to present it in an honest way. And I've always said, I'm okay hearing things that I don't like. And Steve is certainly okay hearing things he may not like, but if it's coming from a place of sincere honesty, you can respect the position and really think about it. And many times I've heard things, sometimes in discussions with Steve, where I come away from a conversation and I start really thinking about what he said. And I'm like, there's a lot of truth to what was just said there. And it's that willingness to go into the arguments made sometimes on a contrary side to the side you may be on, and breaking down the arguments and the position and seeing where it's coming from, and not just from a gut position saying, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm not even going to think about that, and I'm not going to analyze it, and I'm not going to look at it, and being very closed-minded really doesn't get you anywhere. And I've never had a negotiation end where I've started. So at some point along the way, you're either going to be someone who can't get a deal done, or you're going to be a deal maker, and understand that to get the deal done, any deal, there needs to be flexibility, and there needs to be a willingness to really look at what the other side is saying. And with Steve, you always get his honest assessment of where things are at. And that's all you can ask for.
I love that. Go ahead, Steve. It looks like you were going to say something there.
No. I was just going to say, I've learned over time is, you got to, whatever it is, you got to, I used to, when you're younger, you want to fly off the handle all the time and get mad and argue. And then it's like, just listen, think about it, hear the other side, and then see if you can, again, whether it's with an agent or with another team, you're trying to make a trade or all these things, you learn to try to get things done. And then ultimately, sometimes there isn't a deal to be made. It's just whether there's not a fit, or there's simply, you just disagree, and then ultimately you find another solution for it, whatever it is. But ultimately, again, when we work together, we're working together. Generally, we want the same thing, and that's, we want the player to be happy. We want him to do well. And then, sometimes there's not a fit for different reasons. But again, I've learned a lot over time and how to, again, I think the good GMs around the league, they listen, they're calm, they're rational, they don't fly off the handle. And again, being a former player, that's kind of what we do. It's like, this ain't going to work. I'm not going to last long in this, whether it was with the league or with the agents or with other teams. This approach, I'm not going to, I'm driving myself crazy, let alone everybody else in the business. So just learn a lot. And again, we have great discussions on things. And so I always enjoy the conversation.
So Steve, you built up Tampa to where it was a legitimate threat to win the cup and a consistent contender. And then you left and went back to Detroit. What motivated you to do that and the timing of it?
Well, really the timing of it was, it really was mostly for my family, my kids. When I went to Tampa, our plan, we debated at the time. I had teenagers going into high school, one finishing high school, one going in. And initially it was, we were going to move everybody. And then we decided with our first daughter to get her through high school. And then each year was kind of figuring it out family-wise for it to work. And ultimately, my family stayed in Detroit. My kids went off to college and things. And my wife's, had home base was there for the girls. And then, after a while, I was getting a little bit tired. I was neglecting. Our minor league team was in Syracuse. Obviously, the team was in Tampa, and my home life was in Detroit. And I felt like to do the job the way I really, really wanted to do it. It was like, you know what, I something's got to change here. And ultimately, I made a decision to go back to Detroit because what I felt was best for my family and then best for Tampa. Like I can't half-ass, pardon my language, do this job half-ass. I got to be in Syracuse. I got to be in Tampa. I got to be on the road with Tampa. You need to be there. I had great staff. Julian, as you know, Allan is top shelf. John Cooper was a great coach, but if you're in charge, you got to be there because there's a lot of different perspectives, and you can have the same situation, and you hear the player side, the coach's side, you hear everybody's side, and somewhere in the middle, you got to figure out what exactly is going on, and you have to be there for that, So I just felt like I wasn't doing the job the way it needed to be, and if I can't do it the way I need to be, I got to make a decision, and that's why I went back to Detroit.
Well, listen, Steve, you've been incredibly generous with your time, and I really appreciate you coming on and being as forthright and sharing some of the stories that you have. It's been a great privilege for us to have you here, and I want to thank you.
No, my pleasure. Enjoyed talking as always, Allan. Adam, nice meeting you. Jesse, you guys, I enjoyed talking hockey. It's always a lot of fun. Like I jokingly say, like, Sally, I ain't got much else to offer anybody other than hockey. I wish I had more interesting things to talk about, but nonetheless, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see you at Bruce on March 29th in Detroit.
Are you going to Detroit for that?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'll let you know if I'm going to go too. Again, I'm not sure what our schedule is, but obviously we're not playing at home that night.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet? Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.